Hello everyone, and welcome back to Conspiraseed. Today, we're still on Tier 5 of the Unsolved Mysteries Iceberg. We're on Part 2 of Tier 5. Tier 5, as I mentioned in the last video, is split up into two parts, Part 1 and Part 2, because it's a longer list. My video last time, I think, was one of the longest Unsolved Mystery videos, and it was only half the tier. Thank you for choosing to spend some time with me today. Let's get into it.
Nothing like being subscribed to Conspiraseed on YouTube. Nothing like it.
The Saw Killer of Hanover is an unidentified German serial killer who is supposedly responsible for murdering and dismembering at least 4 women and 2 men. The victims' body parts were found in Hanover and the surrounding areas in the 1970s. None of the killer's victims have been identified. A total of 13 body parts were found between 1975 and 1977, including a severed forearm at a power plant, a lower body in a park, and a torso on a dirt road. On September 26, 1975, the first corpse was found at the hydroelectric power plant near Moxie, a river south of the city center. I'm sorry, I don't know if I pronounced that right. Here's the spelling of it. Volker, if you're watching this video, please let me know if I pronounced that right or how it should be pronounced. The torso of a young woman was found by a worker. The body had probably been in the water for about 14 days. The woman was about 24 years old and about 5'1". The Special Commission designated the corpse as Torso 1, and they said it was cut with either a circular or bandsaw or a surgical instrument. Despite having the fingerprints examined, authorities could not identify the victim. On December 18th of 1977, the last corpse of the series was discovered on a dirt road near Hanover. The upper body of a 50 to 60-year-old woman was found wrapped in an old cotton blanket. Both her arms and legs had been cut off, and she had strangulation marks around her neck. Many of the victims had a cause of death that could not be determined. They had only been dead for a short time before discovery and were cut up. Where they were only able to find some body parts, the rest of the body parts are still missing. The fact that the murders ended abruptly in 1977 meant to a lot of people that the culprit probably either moved, was jailed for a different reason, or had passed away. The Tube Sock killings, also known as the Mineral Washington murders, is a series of murders that occurred in the remote areas of Lewis and Pierce County, New Mineral in Washington state. When couple Steve Harkins and Ruth Cooper left their house for a weekend camping trip on August 10th, 1985, no one thought anything about it. It was pretty normal. However, it was on Monday, when they still had not returned, that people got worried. It was 4 days after their departure, on August 14th, that hikers passing through found the body of Stephen in his sleeping bag, shot in the head. With him still being in his sleeping bag, it was assumed that he had been murdered while he was sleeping. The hikers then found the couple's dog nearby, who had been shot to death. Later, on October 26th, a skull was found near Hart's Lake, which was determined to belong to Ruth via dental records. When they found the rest of Ruth's body, there was a tube sock wrapped around her neck. Over a month after the discovery of Ruth, Mike and his girlfriend Diana, along with their daughter Crystal, left their house to go on a camping trip. Later that night, customers at a Kmart found the couple's daughter standing outside the store entrance. She was placed in foster care until her maternal grandmother saw her photo in the local news 2 days later. When asked where her parents were, she responded with, "Mommy was in the trees," and she was not nearly verbal enough to provide any information. Police searched the area both on foot and by air, looking for evidence of the red 1982 Plymouth pickup truck. On February 18th, 1986, more than 2 months after the couple's disappearance, the body of Diana was discovered half buried in snow by a passing vehicle. Bloodhounds searched the area, but they found nothing. The pickup truck was also found near the body. In the truck, police discovered a handwritten note that said, "I love you, Diana." Diana's mother said that the handwriting was Mike's. The autopsy revealed that Diana had been stabbed 17 times and was found with a tube sock around her neck, just like Ruth. Since they couldn't find Mike, investigators suspected that he may have been responsible for the murder and abandoned his daughter at the Kmart and then fled. They were not able to determine a motive for him, however. Police then theorized that he may have been responsible for both Stephen and Ruth's killings as well. An alternative theory is that he was murdered by the same killer who murdered the others and had just not been found yet. On March 26, 2011, almost 3 decades later, a human skull was found within a mile radius of where Diana's body was found in 1986. The skull was determined to be Mike's, and while a cause of death could not be determined, they could rule out a gunshot wound to the head, as the skull was still intact. The Gypsy Hill killings were a group of 5 homicides of young women and girls in San Mateo County, California in 1976. The killer became known in the media as the San Mateo Slasher. However, it was later proved that there were at least 2 different perpetrators. On January 8, 1976, the body of Veronica Casquillo was discovered in a creek on the grounds of the Sharp Park Golf Course in Pacifica, California. She had been stabbed 30 times, and a homeless person was arrested, but then later released due to lack of evidence. A few weeks later, Tatiana Blackwell was reported missing after leaving her house in Pacifica. Her body was discovered in the Gypsy Hills section of the city on June 6. She also had been stabbed multiple times. Paula Baxter went missing on Wednesday evening, February 4th, after finishing a play rehearsal at the local high school. Her nude body was found on February 6th in Millbrae behind a Mormon church. She'd been stabbed 4 times, sexually assaulted, and hit on the head with a piece of concrete. On April 1st, 19-year-old Denise Lamp was found dead after a search in the parking lot of the Serramonte Center. She'd been stabbed 20 times. Carol Booth, 26, was reported missing by her husband on March 15th and was discovered in a shallow grave near Colma Creek in the San Francisco area on May 6th. Investigators have connected some of the homicides to each other. All the slain women were young brunettes, and most had experienced car trouble prior to being murdered, and all the bodies were found in wooded areas. Since there was a lack of witnesses or forensic evidence, it stalled the investigations. There is some forensic evidence that linked Rodney Halborough to 2 of the murders, and on November 8, 2017, Leon Seymour was charged with the murder of Denise Lamp based on DNA evidence. There was not enough evidence to charge or convict anyone else for the murders of the other girls. The I-70 Strangler is the nickname of an unidentified serial killer who murdered at least 12 males in the Midwestern U.S. between 1980 and 1991. All the victims' bodies were discovered in the areas along I-70. While this is officially unsolved, it's believed that the now-deceased businessman Herbert Neumeister, a suspect in over a dozen homicides in Indiana, may have been the perpetrator. The killer would choose young boys and adolescents as victims, who he would meet in popular gay bars and similar establishments within a 4-block radius in Indianapolis. All of the victims were found naked or partially clothed near I-70, often dumped in rivers, streams, and ditches in the rural countryside. Each victim had been strangled to death. A task force of 8 officers was created by the Indianapolis Police in 1982 to investigate the crimes. Following the discovery of a body in June of 1983, 4 more men were included to the list of potential victims. Like the other victims, they were homosexual, visited gay bars, and were killed in Indianapolis. In 1983, the FBI joined the investigation, with profilers suggesting that the offender showed volatile behavior when committing the murders. Near the end, it was determined that there were at least 2 different perpetrators operating independently of one another. In February of 1998, an Indianapolis resident contacted the police and claimed that Herb Baumeister was photographed leaving the Vogue Theater with one of the victims. Prior to his self-death, in 1996, Herb was the prime suspect in the murders of at least 7 men who were killed between 1993 and 1995 in Indianapolis, whose remains were found on his property. After this information surfaced, he was named as the prime suspect in the I-70 Strangler case. According to the investigators, he stopped dumping the bodies of his victims in 1991 after he bought the farm, which he could then use as a burial site for his victims. No physical evidence, however, has ever linked him to the victims. The New Bedford highway killer is responsible for the deaths of at least 9 women and disappearances of 2 additional women in New Bedford, Massachusetts between March 1988 and April 1989. The killer is also suspected to have assaulted numerous other women. All the killer's victims were known sex workers or had struggled with addiction. While the victims were taken from New Bedford, they were found in the surrounding towns as well. There were 4 suspects who were investigated, although none of them were convicted for the killings. The victims were Robin Rhodes, Rochelle Daparala, Deborah McConnell, Deborah Medeiros, Christina Montero, Marilyn Cardoza Roberts, Nancy Pava, Deborah DeMello, Mary Santos, Sandra Botello, and Don Mendez, all between 19 and 35. The suspects were Anthony DeGarza, Kenneth Ponte, Daniel Tavers, and the Lisbon Ripper. Anthony was a 26-year-old construction worker. His picture was shown to a locally known sex worker in New Bedford. While she did say that she was assaulted by a man that looked like him, she never identified him as a positive suspect. Kenneth was accused of killing Rochelle. He entered a plea of absolutely not guilty and posted the bond of $50,000. The district attorney later dropped murder charges against him, citing lack of evidence. Daniel was in prison for the murder of his mother and sent a threatening letter to one of the prison staff, indirectly claiming responsibility for the highway killings. It wasn't until 2015 that he was convicted for the murder of Gell. The last suspect, the Lisbon Ripper, was a serial killer in Lisbon, Portugal, who killed sex workers a few years after these killings, in 1992 and 1993. The FBI traveled to Lisbon, and 2 Portuguese police traveled to New Bedford, as both had the idea that these were connected. The I-45 killer is heavily linked to the Texas killing fields, with him dumping the bodies in the fields. So if you want more information on that, you can click here and watch the video that has the Texas killing fields in it. The Chicago Strangler is a serial killer or multiple serial killers believed to be responsible for the deaths of a number of women in Chicago. Since 2001, at least 50 women between the ages of 18 and 58 have been murdered in a similar fashion within the city of Chicago. The victims were predominantly black, typically were prostitutes, and often had previous experiences within the justice system. The victims were strangled, stripped of their clothing, and then left in abandoned areas. The pattern was recognized in 2018 through the Murder Accountability Project, which reviewed over 50 unsolved strangulation cases dating back to 2001. The algorithm used by the project sorts unsolved homicides by location, victim, and killing method in order to identify clusters associated with low homicide clearance rates. According to the project, these factors could be indicative of an active serial killer. Following pressure from activists, the Chicago Police Department announced their review of 51 unsolved murders of women. They claimed that there was no evidence that a serial killer was responsible for any of the 51 killings. Personally, to me, Chicago has a high homicide rate, it has a large African American community, and prostitutes are some of the easiest people to get away with murder. I mean, it's sad, but it's true, because oftentimes they don't really have anyone looking out for them. So I think this is just a case of pareidolia, right? Seeing patterns where there isn't any real patterns. The Bowerville murders is the name given to the 3 deaths that occurred over 5 months from September 1990 to February 1991 in Bowerville, New South Wales, Australia. All the victims were Aboriginal and disappeared after parties in the community in the area known as the Mission. A local day laborer was the prime suspect and was charged with 2 of the murders but was acquitted. There were similarities between the murders that led the police to believe that they were committed by the same killer. They all took place within that 5-month time frame. All 3 were Aboriginal, they all suffered trauma to the head, and they all disappeared after parties within the community. There is, unfortunately, no other information on this case. The Alphabet murders are a series of child murders which occurred between 1971 and 1973 in Rochester, New York. All 3 victims were 10 or 11, and their last name began with the same letter that their first name began with. Carmen Colon, Wanda Walkowitz, and Michelle Menza. They were all found sexually assaulted and murdered by strangulation, and their bodies were discarded in a nearby town or village near Rochester, also with the name beginning with the same letter as the victim's name. So Carmen was found in the city of Churchville, Wanda was found in Webster, and Michelle was found in Macedon. All 3 murders generated intense public outrage and had much publicity. Following the murder of Michelle, investigators released a composite drawing of the individual seen with the child by numerous witnesses to the media. They also had a telephone hotline devoted to the manhunt for the perpetrator, who they strongly suspected had committed all 3 murders. Anonymity was offered to any caller offering information, and a reward was offered for any information leading to the arrest and conviction of the perpetrator. These efforts resulted in numerous calls from the public, but no credible suspect was located. The teardrop rapist is responsible for 35 sexual assaults on women, including minors, in Los Angeles, California. The assaults began in 1996 and continued through 2012. He's believed to be a Hispanic male with a light complexion and at least 1 teardrop tattoo under his eye. The perpetrator was thought to have stopped his assaults in 2005, but in November of 2011, a 15-year-old girl was attacked and DNA evidence was linked to the same person. However, the 15-year-old victim did not see the tattoo that many of the previous victims had, perhaps due to tattoo removal. After an attempted assault on June 5th, 2012, police announced plans to canvass the Hispanic neighborhoods of LA and offered a $50,000 reward for information leading to an arrest. On July 27th, 2013, LAPD announced their collaboration with the FBI and increased the reward to $100,000. They also released a new set of composite sketches. Here's the composite sketch, and here's the physical characteristics of the man authorities believe committed these crimes. Hispanic male, brown hair, 5'2" to 5'6", 130 to 170 pounds, may have a teardrop tattoo or some type of scar underneath an eye if it was removed, and most likely between 40 and 55 if still alive. If you have any information regarding this one with it being so recent, contact LA Police at 213-486-1000. The Oklahoma Girl Scout murders took place on the morning of June 13, 1977 at Camp Scott in Mayes County, Oklahoma, United States. The victims were 3 Girl Scouts between the ages of 8 and 10 who were raped and murdered. Their bodies were left on a trail leading to the campsite showers about 150 yards from their tent. The case was classified as solved when a local jail escapee with a history of violence and was arrested. However, he was acquitted in March 1979 after a jury unanimously returned a verdict of not guilty. Less than 2 months before the murders, during an on-site training session, a counselor at the camp discovered that her belongings had been ransacked and her donuts had been stolen. Inside the empty donut box was a handwritten note stating in all capital letters, "We are on a mission to kill 3 girls, intent 1." The director of the camp session treated the note as a prank and it was discarded. However, on the morning of June 13th, a camp counselor was on her way to the shower when she saw a girl's body in her sleeping bag in a wooded area outside of the tent area. It was discovered that all 3 girls from Tent 7 were missing. As counselors began searching, they discovered the girls from Tent 7 had been murdered. 2 bodies were inside sleeping bags, crumpled towards the bottom of the bag, and 1 body was visible on the outside. They'd been left on a trail leading to the showers about 150 yards from their tent. Subsequent testing showed that they had been bludgeoned and strangled. A large red flashlight was found on top of the girls' bodies, and a smudged fingerprint was found on the lens, but it has never been identified as it was too smudged for a positive identification. A footprint of a 9.5 size shoe was also found in the blood in the tent. Between 2:30 and 3 a.m. on June 13th, a landowner reported hearing quite a bit of traffic on a remote road near the camp. Camp Scott was evacuated and later shut down. This one especially is really creepy to me. I used to go on campouts when I was in Scouts. I was in the Boy Scouts as a kid. I used to go on campouts, and I was always afraid of something or someone in the woods breaking into my tent. It was always something I feared. Anytime I went camping, I probably got 2 or 3 hours of sleep at most, and it wasn't consecutive. It was 15 minutes to a half hour every couple hours. So this one spooks me just thinking about. I can't imagine waking up one morning and hearing that there were dead bodies found and they'd been murdered. I don't even know what I would probably need counseling or something. I don't know. I would just stop talking to anyone. I would never do anything, and I would never leave my room, which I already don't do that. I already don't talk to a lot of people. I already don't leave my room. My social anxiety is just very high, but I imagine if this happened, it would just be way worse. So, I don't know, man. This one just really got to me when I was researching it, and even right now, I'm a little creeped out about it. Anyway, that's part 2 of Tier 5 of the Unsolved Mysteries Iceberg. Thank you for choosing to spend some time with me today. It really does mean a lot. Let me know in the comments down below if you have any video ideas that you'd like to see in the future, and I'll catch you in the next one.